right, we will begin with questions of Dr. Lewis by the commission. The commissioners on the platform, Commissioner Aladogu and Commissioner Rosatos, do either of you have questions of Dr. Lewis?
Madam Hearing Officer, no, I do not. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That was Commissioner Rosatos. All right, let's start today on that side of the dais. Commissioners, I'm looking to have questions of Dr. Lewis.
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Dominguez. Okay.
Dr. Lewis, thank you for your testimony this morning. During your testimony, you made it pretty clear that the data is not sufficient enough to establish standards for many of these unknowns or possibly even some of the knowns. What will it, obviously additional research is needed to get there, but what's it going to take to elevate that research level to a point where this commission could actually have the information necessary to set standards?
I mean, I couldn't estimate how much work that is, but it's a lot of work to conduct all the research necessary to evaluate the various, potential impacts both to human and environmental health.
Thank you for that. But in your professional opinion, that data is necessary in order for this commission to make a sound determination as far as utilizing produced water. Is that a correct statement?
So as far as discharging produced water, to the environment where human and ecological receptors, would be exposed, yes, I think that would be necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fry.
Thanks for your testimony. You mentioned treatment trains in your testimony, and I'm wondering if you could give a definition. I have an idea, but it'd be nice to have a definition.
Sure. Yeah. Treatment trains is essentially the idea that you use multiple treatment technologies in series. So you treat the water first using one technology, you then transfer that water to a second technology that might focus on a different set of constituents, and then a third, and so forth. The idea being that each different treatment technology is going to focus on a certain constituent or class of constituents based on the physical and chemical processes that are employed in the technology.
Okay. And Dr. Hu and you, I believe both of you referred to his testimony in particular. He refers to some of these treatment trains, as I understand it. Can you give examples in other industries where they may have to have multiple treatment trains?
Sure. Even in sort of the drinking water industry, where you're serving up drinking water to the public, there are, so-called primary, secondary, and tertiary treatments, and where they will do different processes to treat the water before they serve it up to the public.
Okay. And I think in reading your testimony, as I recall, your main criticism of the rules as presented is in the definitions. Or I'm sorry, that's somebody else's. Sorry. That's the next. Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Zemlich.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I got caught off guard there. I do have one question, or one area of questions. What is your opinion on the discussion in the proposed rule about demonstration facilities? Specifically, in your professional experience, are there do you have any criticisms or opinions otherwise on how they're described in the rule?
On how they're like the actual language of the wording. I don't recall any criticisms.
Okay, that was it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner McWilliams.
Yeah, just a quick question. Commissioner Dominguez stole my other question. I guess I was wondering how your testimony aligns with the commission's responsibility to specify a standard of performance for new sources that reflects the greatest reduction in the concentration of water contaminants that the commission determines to be achievable through the application of best available demonstrated control technology, processes, operating methods, or other alternatives.
Yeah, well, I understand from reading the petition, NMED's petition, that can include as well prohibition.
Prohibition of,
Discharge.
okay. And then one more question. I believe you spoke to the, and correct me if I mischaracterize this, but did you say that the choice to run PFAS tests speaks volumes?
Yes.
Could you clarify that for me?
Sure, because PFAS are known to be toxic at low concentrations, and like the constituents in produced water, there are many versions of PFAS in existence, and we know very little about their toxicity.
So are you suggesting that the test was conducted indicates they believe there's PFAS present and not to characterize completely the water source?
Could you state that question again? Sorry.
I guess I'm asking if you're suggesting that the fact that the test was conducted indicates they believe there is PFAS present and not to characterize completely the source water.
No, I believe that their choice to measure PFAS speaks to the fact that the authors of that paper believe that it's important to characterize the TICs,
Okay.
tentatively identified compounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that clarification.
sure.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Vice Chair Armstrong.
Thank you. Building off of Commissioner McWilliams' questions on PFAS, I was interested in that part of your testimony also, not specifically to PFAS, but because of PFAS and all the other contaminants that get filtered out during the process. What's the volume of that? I don't know the right technical term, septage or sludge. What's the volume of byproduct that comes out of produced water treatment, if you're aware of it?
So I don't have numbers at the tip of my tongue, but I can say generally that it's going to be variable because the constituent concentrations in produced water are variable. So if there's a lot of salts on a mass basis, you're going to have a lot of waste, solid waste as well.
I'm curious, I'm probably going to ask other folks that same type of question going forward. I'm curious about our ability to deal with, depending on the volume, I'm curious about our ability to deal with it.
Yeah, I didn't look specifically into sort of those other waste streams. I was focused on, in my testimony and research, on the water side and the discharge of the water, not the waste treatment.
Understood. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Chair Thompson.
Thank you. And very good testimony. I appreciate it. And I'm very impressed with your qualifications and experience. So thank you for sharing that with us. My question goes more to the finished product. So if a company tested a treatment process following the appropriate NOI and the pilot plant demonstration criteria established in the record or in the proposed rule in section 400, and they demonstrated that this water could meet all of the numeric and descriptive criteria, the Safe Drinking Water Act, which regulates about 100 constituents. Would it be safe to use that water for drinking?
I believe there would be residual risk associated with that water due to the fact that there are constituents, and there may be constituents in that water that aren't identifiable with known tests. And there may be constituents in that produced water that aren't removed using the treatment technologies that target those other 100 compounds.
Couldn't you make the same argument about direct potable reuse of municipal wastewater?
I think in theory you could, but in the case of like municipal use of regular like municipal water, what's in that water generally, right? It's not beginning as a brine. It's not beginning as containing large volumes of petroleum, hydrocarbons. It's not beginning containing large concentrations of potential radionuclides and metals that are in produced water.
I challenge that because with the municipal sewer shed, you're going to have household hazardous waste, you're going to have industrial waste, hospital waste. I had a MRI a while back, and they gave me seemed like a gallon of contrast solution to drink. It was a gadolinium dye. And I can say with some confidence that the gadolinium went right through me to the wastewater treatment plant. And I'm pretty confident the Southside Water Reclamation Plant did not remove the gadolinium. So that's an unregulated constituent. And hospitals are full of that stuff we talked about. You mentioned pharmaceutical, personal care products. We don't test for them. Many of them, there are no analytical procedures for. The other 3,995 PFAS constituents we don't test for. And yet they are almost certainly present. So your characterization of knowledge of what's in raw municipal wastewater, I think is I don't agree with, because I think there are far more unknowns in that, and these are problematic constituents because many of them, like the pharmaceuticals and personal care products, are intended to have some effect on our body. So, and yet we in New Mexico and certainly other states accept direct potable reuse. So
Can you pose a question?
I'm trying to formulate it, but thank you. You're right. I'm rambling and I do that. So I want to know what is wrong with the current drinking water criteria, or how they should be changed to permit potable reuse of treated produce water that meets the current standards.
So may I offer a response to the earlier statement?
Please.
So what I would say is just because that happens, that hospitals are discharging patients with, you know, chemotherapy in their system, doesn't mean that it is a good thing. First of all, I would also say that, you know, these are the reasons why over the last, you know, decades we have seen changes in how governments recommend individuals dispose of pharmaceuticals. So it used to be that they would say, hey, you know, take your pharmaceuticals and dump them down the toilet. And now they don't say that. They say you should actually add water to the canister and throw it in a landfill. And so there, you know, society is taking steps to try to address those issues. So the fact that, you know, that kind of potable reuse takes place using municipal streams doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% safe. And I testified in my testimony about the fact that it is a public health concern that we've got pharmaceuticals and personal care products in all of our natural waterways now, and that we've got PFAS ubiquitous in the environment in all of our bodies. So that's just a quick response to that. I think if I could try to address your question, if I remember it correctly, the question was really to what do we need to do to get to a place where the standards are effective? Was that the nature of your question?
Now, my question more was, if what's wrong with the standards now that would prohibit potable reuse of treated produced water?
I think that they don't cover the known and the unknown constituents. That's what's wrong with them. So again, produced water is known insofar that it is understood that it is a waste stream that contains toxic compounds and a bunch of proprietary chemicals, the impacts of which we don't know and we can't even test for, and that is the basis of that problem. Is that we don't have the criteria to show that water has been sufficiently cleaned. We don't have the analytical methods to measure the effluents from those treatment processes to show that the water is safe, to guarantee to the public that it is safe.
Thank you. And I would suggest that every one of your concerns I agree with, but I think you can make the same concerns about direct potable reuse of municipal wastewater as well. So, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Patton, do you have questions of Dr. Lewis?
Yes, thank you for your testimony. I've got just a couple questions. I'm trying to think back to my early chemistry days in college. Could you remind me what a unit of measure for a picocurie per milliliter is?
Picocurie per liter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we think about most conventional contaminants, we think about concentration, and so that is you know, usually on a mass basis. So you've got milligrams of that thing per liter. When it comes to radionuclides, we think about activity, and that has to do with the disintegrations because radioactive elements disintegrate and release energy. And so when you're measuring radionuclides, you usually measure them in terms of activity. So that's what that unit is an activity unit.
And so pico refers to 10 to the negative.
I believe it's 12. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to, I think it was part of your rebuttal testimony where you were looking at the Zhang et al. Paper, and I started writing it down because I didn't quite catch what you said, so I might have the terms mixed up. But you were comparing the TICs to a comparison of, I think it was total organics or something like that. And in one case, you said the organics or whatever that topic was somewhere a low number up to 130 or so milligrams per liter. And then the TICs were some low number up to approximately 100 or excuse me, 1,000. And I couldn't catch whether it was micrograms per liter and not milligrams per liter. Is that
right? Yeah. So the author was correct, or Hightower was correct in stating that they were 100 times lower. So they were lower in terms of magnitude. But my point in that is that even though they were lower, they're lower than concentrations of like conventional gasoline range organics and diesel range organics that were extremely high. So they still were appreciable concentrations in the milligrams per liter, micrograms per liter range.
Okay, great. I just wanted to clarify what I thought I heard. And okay. And then my last question is, we've heard from the public through comment over the past 3 days about their concern with even demonstration projects of produced water outside of the oil and gas areas. And I guess just from your perspective, can you give an opinion about the overall risks associated with even demonstration projects compared to the information we might gather during the demonstration projects and the treatment projects and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I was unfortunately not asked to look into the risks associated with demonstration projects, so I can't really opine on that.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Vihil, do you have questions?
No, thanks. I don't have any questions for you at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move then from the questioning by commissioners to questioning by the parties. And again, under the pre-hearing order, we go in reverse order of presentation. So that means we begin with Namoga. Yes, absolutely. And I'll ask you to introduce yourself for the court reporter.
Okay. Tried to learn from Mr. Knight how to use the microphone yesterday, but maybe in the same position as him. My name is Carrie, Kari Olson, Olson, from Montgomery and Andrews on behalf of Namoga. Good morning, Dr. Lewis.
Good morning.
I will get right into it. So I'm going to start with your background. And I echo the commissioner's statements. You have a very impressive background. So after earning your PhD, am I correct that most of your postdoctoral professional experience has been as a technical consultant for industrial economics?
That's correct.
And is it correct that the primary focus of your consulting work is on post-release assessments, natural resource damages, environmental impacts for state and federal agencies?
Could you restate that post-release?
Yeah, post-release assessments as opposed to
Like permitting, you mean?
you come in after a spill or something already happened and assess the damage from that. Is that correct?
In the context of the damages assessment work, that's correct.
Okay.
But I also do other areas of work.
Sure. And I understand from your resume and summary, you also provide policy analysis and decision-making support. And is it correct that this is primarily based on literature reviews of available research, but not necessarily your independent research?
That's not, in some cases I do, yeah, sort of. I mean, I definitely do some primary research and direct primary research. And we also do some primary analysis in terms of modeling, developing models to assess questions, things like that. So.
Okay. And just to try to understand this a little bit better, I learned from your resume and summary that you do field studies and research in connection with the releases. Is that generally the primary research that you're talking about, or
Yes.
is there something else? Okay. Um, and I know you have experience from all over the country and some experience as well in New Mexico. Um, are you generally familiar with the freshwater supply in New Mexico?
Generally, yes.
And have you had a chance to review the state water plan? I know you reviewed Mr. D'Antonio's testimony.
I did. I don't recall reviewing the state water plan specifically.
Okay. As general concepts, do you agree that New Mexico has faced significant droughts in recent years?
I would agree.
outside the scope.
I'm exploring the scope of Dr. Lewis's knowledge, and the question was whether he's aware or agrees that New Mexico has faced significant droughts. Droughts.
Right. He definitely didn't approach that as a topic in his testimony.
Okay.
So I don't think you are exploring his testimony.
Well, I'm exploring his knowledge
Okay. But
to inform the opinions that he's giving in his testimony. So we're don't want to talk about his knowledge about New Mexico water, then I can move on.
okay. Dr. Lewis, would you consider your knowledge about New Mexico water to form the basis for your testimony today?
I don't necessarily think that the knowledge of my water, my knowledge of the New Mexico water situation has direct bearing on my opinions related to the risks associated with produced water.
Okay. Thank you. Please move on.
Okay, so is it your opinion that the commission doesn't need to consider the state of water supply in New Mexico as part of this rulemaking?
Yeah, he's not going to testify about
Okay.
water conditions in New Mexico.
So you walked through this a little bit with your counsel this morning, and I just want to make sure I understand. You provided a list of papers you reviewed as part of preparation of your direct and rebuttal testimony within your testimony. Is that right?
That's correct.
Have you, it was unclear this morning when you were answering this, did you review additional papers, presentations, or information provided by other parties in addition to what was listed in your testimony?
No, everything that I reviewed pursuant to my testimony was listed in the references section.
Okay. And then in preparation for the hearing today, did you review additional documents disclosed as exhibits by other parties?
Just those disclosed in my rebuttal.
Okay. Have you generally been following the public hearing?
Not really.
Okay. Did you hear any of the department's testimony yesterday?
Not a significant amount.
Okay. But you have reviewed their pre-filed testimony, is that correct?
I reviewed Dr. Who's testimony.
Okay. Have you reviewed the department's proposed rule?
Yes.
And is it your general understanding that the proposed rule is a first step in a potentially multi-phase process?
I don't pretend to know what NMED's long-term planning process is related to the rule.
Okay. In your review of the rule, would you agree this rule does not address domestic water reuse?
I believe it does not address domestic, to my knowledge. It's separate.
Okay, and your understanding of the rule is that it does not currently provide standards?
I don't recall seeing anything about standards in the
Just skipping over some of this. So you testify, I believe in your direct testimony, your opinions that NMED's proposed prohibition on discharges of all produced water to surface and groundwater is consistent with other states' requirements. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
That the proposed prohibition in the proposed rule on all discharges of all produced water is consistent with other states' requirements?
So I do think it is consistent in that I think there are other, to the extent that I reviewed other states' practices, there are taking steps to minimize the adverse impacts associated with permitted discharges.
Are you aware of any other states that have adopted regulations banning all discharges of produced water?
No, I don't think so.
All right. And I understand from your direct testimony, the primary conclusion is assessing produced water is difficult because of the variable makeup of produced water. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And in your direct testimony, you state that several constituents found in untreated produced water are known hazards.
Yes.
Do you agree that the source water constituents for produced water are generally known?
No.
Okay, so your testimony about unknowns relates to the water that's naturally occurring as well as any constituents that may be added through the oil and gas process.
Maybe I'm not following your question. Could you restate the original question?
Yes, so the source water, I'm referring to the water that's existing in the
Okay.
source. Do you agree that the constituents in that source water are generally known?
Generally known by whom? It depends on the source.
Okay, so is your testimony about unknown constituents applicable to what's naturally occurring as well as what's being added through the oil and gas process?
No, I was referring generally to constituents that are constituents that are added that are proprietary. When I refer to unknown constituents, in theory, there could also be transformation byproducts that are also unknown that could be resulting from sources or naturally occurring constituents in the source water or in the additives.
Okay. And so I'm going to talk about the known constituents to start with.
Sure.
And in your testimony, you list various constituents that are in produced water. I think arsenic, metals, benzene, salts. And do you agree those known constituents are also found in other effluent source categories?
Like what effluent source categories, just generally?
Yeah, they can be found outside of produced water. Other water sources can potentially have benzene,
Yes.
can potentially have salts,
Sure.
can potentially have metals,
Yep.
can potentially have arsenic.
Yes.
And do you agree that there's existing water quality standards that address and provide standards for these known constituents?
I disagree. I think there are lots of known constituents for which there are not water quality standards.
Okay, I apologize. That might not have been clear. I'm talking about the ones that we were talking about: benzene, arsenic, salts.
Those were just examples.
Section vague. What constituents are you referring to? You list them specifically.
The known constituents that you list:
Which are
arsenic, metals, benzene, salts. That those are addressed in existing
Those were just
standards.
examples in my testimony. That was not meant to be an exhaustive list.
Okay, but for those ones, you would agree there's existing standards?
Like just the ones that I listed in my testimony.
Mhm.
I would have to go look back to confirm. I'm not positive that there are existing standards for all of those.
Do you agree there's existing standards for arsenic,
I believe there are existing standards for arsenic, yes.
for benzenes,
Benzene, yes.
and for TDS or salts?
Yes.
And do you agree that EPA and the state environmental agencies use scientifically defensible methods to develop those existing standards?
Objection, what states are you referring to?
Do you agree that EPA and New Mexico, for example, use scientifically defensible methods to develop those standards?
Or specifically the three that you mentioned, TDS, arsenic, and benzene?
For the standards that are codified in the regulations?
Objection outside this.
You don't know.
He hasn't testified to the efficacy of the New Mexico rulemaking over the last decades of developing water quality standards.
Right. He did spend a fair amount of time on identifying the standards. So go ahead if you want to answer the question, please.
So I don't have any reason to believe that the regulatory process that New Mexico has used has major flaws associated with it. Has major flaws associated with it.
Okay. And your testimony addresses concentrations of contaminants in untreated water that can vary considerably. Is that accurate?
You say that again?
You testified that concentrations of known contaminants in untreated water can vary considerably.
Yes.
Untreated produced water, excuse me.
Correct.
Does the variability in concentration of a constituent in untreated water have influence on the testing of the treated effluent?
Have influenced the testing of the treated effluent? Yeah, can you just restate? Yeah.
Yeah, it might be helpful if I provide an example. So take salt.
Okay.
If there's a very high concentration of salt or a low concentration of salt in the untreated produced water, does that influence or impact the testing of the treated water?
Influence the testing?
Yeah, when you're testing the treated water to determine what the concentration of the treated effluent is, does it matter what the starting concentration was?
I believe that the concentration of the starting starting concentration could influence the effluent concentrations, if that's what you're asking. But that's different from whether or not whoever's testing it is choosing to use a different method or not. But it could influence their ability to detect that contaminant in the water due to the sensitivity of that whatever testing they're using, or it could overwhelm the testing if it's too high, for example.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to your testimony on the unknowns. You rely on the Danforth publication to support your opinions regarding the composition and toxicity of produced water. I think you testified to that.
And other sources, yes.
Okay. And are the other sources the sources that are cited in your testimony?
Yes.
And I believe you cite to a 2015 EPA study in your testimony.
I'll take your word for it. Am I direct or my rebuttal?
I believe it's in your direct, and I apologize. I thought I had the page number, but I'm not seeing it. It's on page 8, line 13.
You, you're saying in the text, it's on page 8?
Yeah, I'm looking at your direct testimony, page 8.
Yes, the 2015 study, yes.
And is that a peer-reviewed publication, or is that just a EPA study?
That's an EPA report.
Okay. And the Danforth source that you cite is a literature review of other papers relating to produced water. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And are you aware of some of the criticisms of that study?
No.
And then you provided a letter this morning. Are you familiar with that letter?
Yes,
And is that public comments that was submitted as part of the triennial review proceeding?
that's my understanding.
Okay. And are you aware of the context in which that was submitted?
Marginally, from what I can tell from reading the letter, yes.
Would you agree that that was submitted as a advocacy piece for a particular position of that entity's interest?
I would acknowledge that, yeah.
And you would not consider that letter a scientifically vetted publication, is that correct?
This letter,
Mhm.
I don't have any reason to believe that it is, there are errors associated with it, but I don't believe it's been peer reviewed.
Okay. And I believe one of the commissioners talked about this morning, but one of your concerns with discharge of produced water is that the treatment technology may not equate to complete removal of all constituents. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And I believe you were asked this morning of the universe of research that might be needed to provide that assurance. From a technical standpoint and someone who's in the research community, are you familiar with papers that concludes that, or for other treatment sources, for other water sources that have concluded with 100% certainty that the treatment technology is 100% certain in all instances?
Objection, could you specify the sources you're talking about?
I'm asking if he's aware of sources.
Can you repeat the whole question? I'm aware of sources. Is that what?
Yeah, are you aware in other contexts for treatment technologies for other types of water of studies that have established with 100% certainty that the treatment technology would be 100% effective in all instances?
No.
And I think you stated this morning, but I was a little bit confused on your rebuttal and surrebuttal about the papers that were cited in Dr. Balch's rebuttal testimony regarding treatment. Did you review those specific papers?
No.
And I believe this morning you also talked about some of Mr. Hightower's assertions. And I think you testified you have a general sense of the publications that have come out of the consortium. Is that correct?
No, I was just acknowledging that in the course of doing my research, I did read some of them that came out of that.
Okay.
The research consortium.
Are you not closely following the ongoing research that they're doing?
Not closely following.
Or are you following the the ongoing research that the consortium is doing?
I mean, I reviewed some of the papers that came out of the consortium
Okay.
as part of my evaluation of risks.
And is that cited in your reference tables?
To the extent that I reviewed a paper, I cited it in my references.
Okay. In your direct testimony at page 12, line 16, I understand you to be agreeing that there have been examples of successes in treating produced water from certain sources to permit requirements.
Yes.
Accurately characterize that. And I know you're not here testifying about permitting requirements or permitting process, but is it your general understanding that if an effluent does not meet applicable standards, it cannot be treated, it cannot be discharged?
Say that again?
Is your understanding of the permitting process that if a treated effluent doesn't meet applicable standards, discharge is not allowed?
Certainly discharge can exceed an effluent permit.
Well, that isn't an authorized discharge.
Violation.
Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Do you agree that science supports that some produced water may be treated to standards?
Vague.
To applicable standards for discharge?
Objection vague. What
She said applicable.
To discharge of water?
So can you repeat the question then?
Are you aware of the current requirements for discharging water in New Mexico?
Am I aware of the current requirements for discharging produced
That
water
apply to discharge of water in New Mexico?
that apply to discharge of generally water,
Mhm.
like NIPD's permits you're talking about?
NIPD's or groundwater discharge?
Sure. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
aware of that. Yeah.
And you agree that to discharge, the permit imposes standards and you have to
Yes.
meet those standards
Yes.
to discharge?
Yes, to receive permit.
Okay, so speaking of those applicable standards, do you agree that science supports that there could be produced water that can be treated to those standards?
I don't know.
Okay. But based on your review of research, you agree that there's examples where produced water has been treated to meet permit requirements in other states?
I read a review article that stated that.
Do you have any reason to
Doubt that they met the
disagree with
standards.
that research?
No, that I don't have any reason to believe that. Yeah, I think that in theory they met those whatever standards were imposed on them. Yes.
Do you agree that, like in those other states, discharge of produced water could be evaluated on a case-by-case basis
By whom?
by the regulator?
That they could be evaluated, that they be treated as pilot studies, for example?
No, the regulator could evaluate a potential discharge of treated produced water on a case-by-case basis.
That they could evaluate it? Like that they could go out and test whether or not they were meeting the permits, or what? I'm not following the question.
As opposed to adopting a prohibition on all treated produced water in all instances, could the commission, like in other states, review discharge on a case-by-case basis, applying standards?
I can't speak to what other commissions can and can't do, or would or would not want to do. Yeah.
I'm talking about this commission.
Okay, sorry.
Is that an option for this commission?
Is it an option for this commission to review? I think the commission can do whatever the commission would like to do.
Okay.
Right.
You speak in your testimony to constituent-specific treatment trains and comprehensive testing as potential ways to address variability in produced water, correct?
I talked about testing as a way to affirm that treated produced water, in fact, is safe to discharge.
And are those comprehensive testing requirements something the commission could consider adding to permits to ensure produced water discharge is safe?
No, because I don't think there are criteria for many constituents in produced water. That's the whole basis of my testimony.
Okay, so you don't think that existing treatment options could test for the presence of those criteria
Sorry, what criteria?
or constituents, excuse me?
What's a treatment options don't test. I'm
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Can current testing analytics can current analytics test for the constituents that you've mentioned exist in produced water?
No, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I believe my understanding is that there are many constituents in produced water for which there are no known approved standard testing methods,
So how do you know those are in produced water?
because there are proprietary chemicals that are added, and we know that the industry is allowed to add proprietary chemicals.
So you know that those chemicals are in the water, but there's no way to detect whether or not they're in the water?
There's no standard methods to detect them. Yes.
Are there methods to detect them?
There may be methods that are unapproved, and in some cases there probably aren't methods.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Lewis. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Dr. Lewis?
I do.
All right, go ahead.
Dr. Lewis, you've testified that produced water, both untreated and treated, poses substantial risks to the environment, particularly to the life and biodiversity of freshwater sources. Would I be correct in summarizing your testimony this way?
That's correct.
You've also indicated that you do not support the discharge of either untreated or treated produced water, these substantial risks, correct?
Sorry, can you restate that?
You've also indicated that you do not support the discharge of either untreated or untreated. I'm sorry. Let me restart. You've also indicated that you do not support the discharge of either untreated or treated produced water due to these substantial risks, correct?
That's correct.
In simpler terms, you've suggested that even a small amount of produced water can significantly harm a larger body of fresh water when mixed. Is that correct?
I think that's possible, yes.
Let's consider a volume of no more than 1 cup of produced water and add it to a gallon of fresh water. Would this mixture be as toxic as undiluted produced water based on your testimony?
You're asking me to do math, but if I could just talk through this, I would say generally that we know, for example, that the salts in produced water in the Permian Basin are up to 10 times as salty as seawater. Therefore, were you to dilute a cup of water 10x, so by 10, it would still be as salty as salt water, which would be salty enough to cause toxicity to freshwater organisms. Yes.
In that context, would you say that the mixture is a solution of produced water, or would you argue that mixture is produced water?
You broke up a little bit. If you could just repeat that one more time.
In that context, would you say that the mixture is a solution of produced water, or would you argue that the entire mixture is produced water?
I would call it diluted produced water.
Does your assessment change if we increase the mixture from 1 gallon of fresh water to 10 gallons of fresh water, but continue to only put in 1 cup of produced water? Basically, if we increase the fresh water by 10 times, but same amount of produced water in the previous scenario, would your opinion remain the same?
That it's still diluted produced water. I would say it is still diluted produced water. It's just an increasingly diluted.
As it's increasingly diluted, does it pose the same risk as it did prior to?
No, as the dilution increases, concentration decreases, and therefore the amount to which a human or an organism would be exposed would be decreased.
Let's increase the volume to about 10,000 gallons of fresh water, roughly the amount of an above-ground swimming pool. Would 1 cup of produced water mixed into this still create the same level of toxicity as it would in 1 gallon of water?
No, I don't. Well, I guess I can't say for sure because I don't know what we're talking about in terms of toxicity or what we're not talking about any specifics in terms of toxicity or chemicals. So it's hard for me to say. I think in theory, it should be less toxic as it is more diluted.
You would agree there is a dilution level at which the mixture is not as toxic to the extent as it is undiluted.
I believe there could be, yes. But
Would
there
you
could also be
testify?
thresholds of toxicity. So
Hold on, Mr. Maxwell, he
there
wasn't
could-
done with his answer.
there could be thresholds of toxicity that the dilution is not reaching so that it's equally toxic.
Would you testify that it applies equally to both treated and untreated produced water?
Sure.
On what scientific evidence have you based that determination?
That it would be that the dilution effect would have the same dilution effect on treated versus untreated produced water,
Yes.
based simply on chemistry and physics.
And just to clarify, are you supporting the use of produced water for industry beyond the oil fields?
I don't have an opinion about use of water in industry beyond oil fields.
Despite your concerns about discharge, isn't transporting produced water necessary for its reuse in industrial applications outside of the oil field?
Protection outside the scope.
Mr. Maxwell, I don't believe that he testified on that question.
He has testified about the discharge of produced water and its effect on freshwater sources, has he not?
Yes, but he said he didn't have an opinion outside of the oil field. Sorry, for industrial use.
And so we're going to say that it's beyond the scope of questioning today to question his risk assessment of transportation of produced water and its relation to how it may be compared to a discharge.
Well, I can confirm, Dr. Lewis, did you come here with opinions about the transportation
I did not.
of produced water? He did not, Mr. Maxwell.
Okay, that crosses a lot of questions out. I really wanted to know what your assessment was on transportation outside of the oil field, because based on your concerns about the contaminants in produced water and the environmental risks, it seems it might be greater in the transport phase than to just keep it where it's at. Would you agree?
Mr. Maxwell, I would take your statement later, but right now it's time for questions of Dr. Lewis, and that was simply not part of his testimony. Do you have other topics to cover?
I asked him if he agreed with my statement.
Again, do you have an opinion? He does not have an opinion on transport. Please move on.
That's all my questioning. Thank you.
Oh, great. All right. Thank
Thank you.
you. Let's go to Ms. Taylor on behalf of Select Water Solutions. I'm just trying to get us to noon. So if you would, about 6 or 7 minutes of questions, we'll come back.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Examiner. Good morning, Dr. Lewis. My name is Liz Taylor, and I represent Select Water Solutions. And so I just have a few questions. Perhaps we can all get out for lunch on time. So have you ever done primary research on produced water?
No.
So your opinions here were based on literature reviews, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you look at the New Mexico Produced Water Consortium's website regularly?
No.
Did you just look at it for this case?
Yes.
I'd like to focus on treated produced water. You assert treated produced water carries the same risk as untreated produced water because treatment does not completely remove contaminants. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. You assert treated produced water carries the same risks as untreated produced water because treatment does not completely remove contaminants.
That's not what I testified to. I said that the treatment would reduce the amount of risk, but it wouldn't eliminate it.
And so you did say that that water treatment is not 100% effective, particularly against non-target compounds.
That's correct.
And that some of those non-target compounds could include pharmaceuticals and personal care products in the municipal waste stream. Let me back up. Isn't it true that municipal domestic wastewater treatment does not completely remove all contaminants?
Which I think there are some municipal waste streams that do better and worse, depending on, again, as I talked about earlier, there's primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment. So depending on the level of treatment will depend on how much comes out the other side.
And I do think, though, that you said that that water treatment is not 100% effective, particularly against non-target compounds such as pharmaceuticals and personal care products.
It has not been, certainly not been 100% effective in the past. Yes.
And in fact, those contaminants, quote unquote, pass through the treatment train in a drinking water facility.
They can. Yes.
And those contaminants also pass through treatment in wastewater treatment plants.
They can. Yes.
And you've testified that unknown constituents in produced water present risk to human health and the environment.
They may present risk to human health and the environment.
And isn't the same true for unknown constituents in municipal or domestic wastewater?
Yes.
And is it the same for, isn't the same true for industrial wastewater treatment?
It could be. I don't know.
Would you agree that there are unknown contaminants in those waters?
Which waters?
In municipal waters?
That there could be unknown
Mhm.
contaminants. I believe there could be unknown.
And in industrial waters?
Theoretically, there could be, yes.
For example, you've testified that PFAS have only recently been identified as ubiquitous in the environment and become the subject of EPA regulations, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Based on that understanding of unknown constituents and less than 100% effective treatment in municipal waste streams, do you recommend that discharges from municipal wastewater treatment plants be prohibited because of the existence of unknown constituents?
I wasn't asked to opine on municipal systems.
Generally speaking about produced water or the production of produced water, if you will, are the constituents of formation water, the water that is in the rocks, in the wells, are those constituents known?
Some of them may be known, yes.
Can they be characterized generally?
Some of them may be characterized.
Do you have any information that says that they cannot be characterized?
Which constituents?
I mean, I'm just asking, is it possible for researchers and for operators to know what's in the formation water in a well?
That's in the naturally occurring formation?
Correct. Yes, that's what I
Is
mean.
it possible for them to know what is in that
Mhm.
water? Yes, it's also possible for them to not know what's in that water.
If a recycler can know the constituents that are in the formation water, can they treat for that?
Sorry, what was that question?
If a business that is recycling water does know or can know what the constituents are in the formation water, can they then treat for that?
In theory, yes. Develop a treatment train to target contaminants that are present, yes.
Would the same be true if a recycler can know the constituents added to the, say, fracking water? Could those constituents be treated for?
I don't know. I don't know what those constituents are, so I can't speak to whether or not they can be treated for.
Is TDS variable in untreated produced water?
That's my understanding, yes.
If you can remove the TDS, does the initial variability affect the ability to test for TDS after treatment?
Say that again?
Okay, I'll break it up.
Yep.
Let's say that you remove the TDS. You know it's in there, you remove the TDS.
Yes.
And then you want to test the water to see if TDS remains. Does the initial variability in the source water make a difference in the ability to test for TDS after treatment?
You're telling me by definition that the TDS has been removed
Yes, sir.
to the same efficacy?
Yes.
It's the same efficacy, then the test should be indistinguishable. If it's not the same efficacy, then it might affect, as I responded earlier, it might affect the ability of the test to distinguish, because tests have, analytic detection windows that they have to operate in, for example.
Is it similar for other constituents?
As far as I know, yes.
And then you said that some constituents can't be tested for.
Yes. I mean, yes. Certainly there are chemicals for which we don't have standard methods to measure them.
Can you just tell me, I'm just curious, can you tell me what some of those are?
If they're unknown, then we can't confirm what they are.
So you really can't tell me, you can't give me an example of a constituent that can't be tested for?
The constituent that can't be tested.
Right.
Yeah, I think there are. This. Yeah, I mean, I from what I understand in reading the literature, I understand that there are constituents for which there are not standard analytical methods. Does that answer your question?
I believe so. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. We will break now for lunch and return at 1. When we return at 1, we will take public comment. And after public comment, we'll resume the questioning of Dr. Lewis.
Testing.
The commission is still on a lunch break. We'll gather again about 1 o'clock for public comment.
Hi, Faith. This is Mike. Hey, I want to do a disposal payment tracker for saltwater easement 63.